The number one rule of meal prepping is removing friction. What do I mean by that? Make it as easy as possible to do. So a lot of people do these really complicated recipes. They make things super dramatic. They spend 4, 5, 6 hours on a weekend to get all their meals prepped. And we want to remove all that friction and try to make this as simple and easy as possible, so it's a lot more likely that you'll stick to it. Who am I? Mike Pfeiffer. I'm a co-founder of Grit Fitness in Louisville, Kentucky. I've been a health and fitness coach for over 20 years. I have helped hundreds of people lose weight, get stronger, and live longer, and I want to bring that experience to you today. Specifically, meal prep. So my board today, not exactly in order, but that number one rule, which the cornerstone of all of this that I want you to think about, is that removing friction. Remove friction. Okay, so I'm going to get into that a little bit more, some more specific ways to do that. But when it comes to meal prepping, and to be frank, if you want to take your fitness, your health, your body aesthetics to the highest level, you're going to do some version of this. And in my opinion, if you're going to even take that phase one step to losing 15 to 30 pounds, or if you got more than 30 pounds to lose, and this is ultimately going to be the backbone of what you do. It doesn't have to be as high percentage of what you do as it might in those phase 2, phase 3s, but if you've got 30 more pounds to lose, you're going to have to do some element of this, okay? So I'm going to try and teach you how to make it as easy as possible. So there are essentially 3 methods, right, that you can do to meal prep. Either you do it, right? Pretty straightforward. You're going to prep all your own stuff. Someone else does it, right? This is actually supposed to say spouse, but that could mean a lot of different things. Hey, if you got kids that are helping you doing this and they're old enough to understand how to cook, so they can be them too. So someone else does it for you, or a professional does it, right? So prof, or you pay someone to do it. So those are essentially your 3 options for how to meal prep. So pretty straightforward. You're going to go in your kitchen and you're going to prep all this yourself. Someone's going to do it for you and or help you do it. It depends on your relationship, but a lot of times in my relationship with my wife, a lot of times I prep all the meat and then she will prep the vegetables, some of the grains, some of the stuff throughout the week that we need on shorter order. But I go out and I'll grill all the stuff, or I'll do the crock pot and I'll do all of that. Right? So that's our balance. It's going to be different for every relationship. And then the last option is a professional does it. There are a lot of services out there that do it. Factor meals are a popular one. Here locally, we've got a place called Macroman, and he does a lot of stuff for that for people. There are a bunch of services online. There's a place called Clean Eats that's a franchise that they do it. And essentially, when you're doing that phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of fat loss, you're figuring out how many calories you need a day, if you need low carb, high protein, low protein, high fat, low fat, and then you use a service to help distribute some of those meals for you so you don't have to do it all yourself. And it can be a combination of these things. Like maybe you feel confident that you can prep the beginning of the week. Like you make something for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, great. But Thursday, Friday, you're going to be tired of eating the same stuff. Maybe you don't like things that are in the fridge for so long. And then you can have someone else do those last couple meals for you to help you stick to that goal, okay? So remembering that cornerstone of remove friction, or like I said in the intro, as easy as possible. And to reiterate on what I said in that, you can absolutely do more complicated meals, big recipes, more flavorful things that you want to do. And I think that's great. And if you want to commit the time to do that and you want to do that more frequently, by all means, go for it. Just in my experience, I've been doing this quite a while. A lot of people start strong with that. They get that momentum. They want to meal prep all this stuff. And they will literally spend 4 to 6 hours on a Sunday doing complicated recipes. The kitchen's a mess. They got stuff all over the place and they prep their whole week. Awesome, right? And they love it and they do it for that week. Week 2 comes around, a little less enthused. Oh man, do I really want to mount up and do all that again on Sunday and kind of take the whole day off, or half the day off that I have of the week and do it again? I did it, okay. Week 3, they do it again, a little less enthused. They don't like the food as much. They've burned through a lot of recipes already. They're less likely to kind of stick with it. And then come Thursday, they'll go out to eat, right? And they kind of break that protocol. The counter to that is if you do that and you lose weight really quickly, maybe that'll reinforce that behavior that you're trying to change. But I think, like most things in life, you overcomplicate things, it becomes more challenging. So we are trying to make this as simple as possible and as easy as possible so you will stick to it and be able to do it consistently over a long period of time. So it's great if you can do it for a week or 2, but we got to think longer term. longer scale. So we need to be able to do this for 3 to 6 months, especially if it's fat loss, and especially if you have a decent amount of fat to lose. You're going to need to sustain this for quite a while to make this effective. So think long term, don't think short term. So we want to make this as easy as possible. All right, so now getting into the nuts and bolts of this. So number one, most important thing of anything we talk about today is going to be protein, protein, protein. All right, that is going to be the most important thing that you do in any of your meal prep. It's kind of the most straightforward, thankfully. It takes the least amount of, let's say, brain power or skill, cooking skill, to do, at least to a degree that's going to taste good enough and get you what you need, right? I'm no chef. My brother's a chef. If I want to do something fancy, I go to him. But to make it very satisfying and taste outstanding, you can do that. But from my perspective, I am skilled enough to at least make things that are tasty enough for me to last throughout the week. All right, so protein, protein, protein. Everyone is under on protein, unless you're already in this world and you already are doing your part, right? But if you're watching this, most likely you are not eating enough protein. I'll just be completely transparent about that. So this is going to be the cornerstone of everything you do. Any video I talk about nutrition, this is going to be number one, okay? I'll do another video later on how much, but for now, just know you're not eating enough and you need more, okay? So you need to make a large volume of protein to last throughout the week. In my opinion, things last pretty good for about 6 days, protein. It will get a little drier as the week continues. That's part of it. It sits in the fridge for a long time. It's going to lose some moisture, right, as some of that evaporates. But I found 6 days is plenty serviceable. The type of meat you use is going to have some variation on that. So in order to make a lot of protein at once, which I think is the most effective way, you're going to use a crock pot, right? That's one way. Instant pot, which is kind of crock pot on steroids, right? It does everything a crock pot does, it just does a lot faster. Oven. Could also mean stovetop if you wanted to use the stovetop as well. A little more complicated, can't do quite as much that way, so it's a little less efficient, but definitely doable. And then the grill, which is my personal favorite, least amount of cleanup, can fit the most amount of things inside of it, right? The simplest to use. So protein, protein, protein. These are the methods: using a crock pot, using an Instant Pot, using the oven, using the grill. And then you can do recipes within this, but let me break down this a little bit better. So you are going to need, unless you're doing a lot of shakes, which we'll talk about in a second, anywhere from 1 to 2 pounds of meat a day, most likely. There's going to be individual variations on that, but more likely than not, you're going to need at least a pound of meat a day, assuming that you eat meat as your protein source. So that's a good amount of meat, right? So that means that if you're going to do this for 6 or 7 days straight, you're going to need 6 pounds of meat to cook. So I personally eat the same meat every day, because then I can go to the grocery store and I can buy one thing, cook one thing, have it all week. And that's just the simplest way to do it. I like to think of this as, I don't want to waste a lot of brain power on my food. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to overcomplicate it. I just want to have the thing there when I need it and do it as simply as possible. So that's kind of the idea that I'm trying to get across to you guys. So 6 pounds of meat. And if you think about this, you can fit 6 pounds in all of these things. Some of them are easier than others, but practical solutions for the crock pot. So the way that I like to do this, and right now I think it's 17 degrees at the time of recording outside. I will absolutely grill on that, but I don't necessarily enjoy it as much. So I have, steered towards the crock pot a little bit for the winter. And what I like to do is, before I go to bed on Saturday, I go ahead and put the meat in the crock pot overnight. The reason I do that is very low effort, right? So another way to remove friction or make it as easy as possible is low effort. So that means that it requires very little mental or physical exertion to accomplish, right? I don't have to put a lot of mental fortitude towards that process. So and when you do the crock pot, you want to fill the water to the level of the meat, just to be safe. So crock pot, I put it in the night before I go to bed on Saturday. That way, when I wake up on Sunday, meat's done. The most complicated and most critical protein, most critical thing that you're going to need throughout the week is complete. So crock pot overnight. Now that can depend on the recipe and on the meat. Certain meats take longer than others, but in general, even if things are done after 6 or 7 hours, that extra hour, if you sleep 8 hours in Sunday, is not going to make or break that meal. Might be slightly drier, not the end of the world. Convenience kind of trumps all of that stuff. When it comes to the Instant Pot, like I said, it's kind of a crock pot on steroids, right? So essentially it'll take a 6-7 hour process and condense that into under an hour in most cases. Again, depends on what you're cooking. As an aside, pork, shoulder, and that kind of depends on your fat intake, turns out awesome in an Instant Pot. I've done it many times over the years. Big fan. Turns out real tasty, real juicy, keeps really, really well. You can do different types of pork in there as well. I don't think it keeps quite as well or cooks quite as well, but pork shoulder, like A+, love it. Now that I've said that, I'm gonna go back and point out some things that are more effective in different aspects and different tools for cooking. All right, so Instant Pot, pork shoulder is really good. What I do, just to give you some anecdotal evidence, I guess, I crock pot overnight my chicken, and I am doing chicken breast, which is definitely leaner, which is great for the way that I like to calculate my stuff. It is a little drier. But then in the morning in the Instant Pot, I am doing black rice in the Instant Pot, so that's what I like to do. And I will take my chicken broth that I created from the crock pot, put it in the Instant Pot instead of water, and then cook my rice in that, and it's quite a bit tastier, right? So it just adds a little more flavor to that. So just recycling the thing that I already did on that. You can do the same, like if you did pork shoulder and you had all that pork juice at the bottom, pork broth, then you had, say you needed to make rice or you wanted to make potatoes or you wanted to make quinoa or something in the Instant Pot after that, then just use that juice, right? Use that broth. It adds a lot of flavor, it makes it really tasty. Oven, and this one now that I'm thinking on this track, I think chicken thighs turn out pretty good in the oven. I've cooked a lot of protein, I've done this a lot, and also pork tenderloin. And pork tenderloin is probably like your A+ winner in the oven. It's pretty easy to get it to the temperature that you want. You can look this up online, but it's 140, just for your information. You can add seasoning to it. It's pretty straightforward, depending on the size of the pork tenderloin, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. Not super complicated, doesn't take a long time, and turns out really, really tasty. And as long as you don't overcook it by too much, it'll hold its moistness throughout the week really, really well. And then grill anything, right? It doesn't matter. I guess I could rephrase that a little bit. Some things aren't going to grill as well as others, but basically any meat can go on the grill. So if you have the luxury of being in a warm climate, you can grill all the time. That is probably the easiest. It's also the easiest to clean, right? Brush everything off. Every month, go in there and clean the bottom of your grill and do all that stuff. But when it comes to all these things, you're going to need a pan in the oven. You're going to need the Instant Pot. You're going to have I'll say bowl. I forget what the thing is in the crock pot. But you're going to have to clean all that, right? So you're going to have to do some extra dishes and big dishes and that stuff. So if you want to just really make it easy, then you just grill it instead, and much less cleanup. Again, removing friction, right? So the least amount of effort you have to put around doing these things, the more likely you are to do it, the less you're going to overcomplicate it or think about it too much, and the more complicit you'll be with the rules. All right, crock pot. Some of you probably will know this, but chili, right? Which could also go here, stovetop, if you wanted to do that. Same idea, right, in the big pot. Chili goes out, which can be bison, turkey, or ground beef. Typically, if you're doing ground beef, you want to do leaner amounts. Again, this is under the assumption that most people watching this are trying to lose weight, specifically lose fat. So you want to steer towards leaner meats just because the calorie math is a little bit more in your favor there. So crock pot, really good for chili. It's so-so for chicken, so yes, I do that. I don't necessarily recommend that because you may not find it as tasty as I do. And that's not something I concern myself with a whole lot. Your beef, the name is escaping me at the moment. Lots of different types of beef will work really well in a crock pot. Roast, should have been that hard to figure out. So like your chuck roast, your Angus roast, or those kind of things, really, really work well in the crock pot. And kind of like the Instant Pot of pork shoulder, if you do a chuck roast type thing in the crock pot, it's going to hold its moisture really, really well. So it's going to keep really well throughout the week. All right? So just to reiterate a little bit, protein, protein, protein. Every meal that you eat throughout the week and throughout the day, protein should be the cornerstone of that. You are almost guaranteed to need 6 pounds of meat throughout the week or 1 pound per day. Many of you are going to need more than that, but I want to start at kind of a reasonable baseline, especially if you're not used to doing this. Let's not throw 2 pounds of meat on you a day, every day, right off the jump. Also depends on your muscle mass and your activity level. There are a lot of things that go into that. But at the lowest common denominator, you're probably going to need 1 pound of meat a day, spread throughout however meals you want to eat. And then I can clean this up a little bit later if you want. Crock pot, really good for doing the night before. That way you wake up, boom, it's done. You didn't do anything, right? Very low effort for it. Instant pot works really well for anything under an hour. Let's say you were out Saturday night at a function and when you get home, you're tired, you don't really want to deal with that and like put that in before you go to bed. Even though it doesn't take that long, like you're ready to brush your teeth and call it a night. So you wake up, you got your whole Sunday, maybe you got to go to church, maybe you got to do stuff with the kids, maybe you want to watch football. You got to get all these things done before that. So Instant Pot just helps you narrow that time window down to under an hour for almost anything. All right. And again, pork shoulder, awesome in that. Oven, chicken thighs and pork tenderloin, with pork tenderloin being like an absolute A+, goes really well with everything, works really well as a dish with other things on your plate at night, keeps its moisture really well. So highly recommend pork tenderloin in the oven, and then on the grill, basically anything will do. All right, so that covers protein. Again, number one thing in your diet will be protein, and trying to make sure that you've got that handled before you move on to anything else you're going to eat throughout the week. Protein is absolutely number one, okay? So when you're on a diet or you're trying to meal prep and you're doing these things, protein is the number one thing that's going to matter the most. It's going to help fill you up. But the objective of prepping all your meals, aside from just the calorie counting, the macronutrient balance, is also to help you stay full. And kind of an under-discussed part of dieting is when you take away calories, you're going to get a little hungrier. And that sucks. You know, it just does. Nobody likes to be hungry. It's not a fun feeling. To a certain degree, it's a part of the fat loss process, right? Because you are intaking less calories than your body needs, so you are going to be a little hungry. But if we can shut that signal off to the best of our ability, it's going to help you stay on top of your diet and stay consistent with your diet. So that's going to come into vegetables. So vegetables, in this discussion, I'm not going to differentiate too much between vegetables, but just understand potatoes are tubers, are root vegetables. For this discussion, they're not necessarily a part of it, okay? So vegetables are your filler. It's not a free food in that sense, but it's pretty close to being so low calorie and so satiating, right? It satisfies that hunger signal that they are, for the purposes of this, just virtually free foods, especially the green stuff. So kale, broccoli, green beans, asparagus, Brussels sprouts, okra, a lot of those are basically free foods that you don't really need to count into that. So those are your fillers. So as you're going throughout the week, or you know there are times that you get really hungry, or you want a meal to be more satisfying so it can sustain you longer. Like for example, say your lunch at work is at noon, but by the time you typically have dinner, it's not till 7:30, and that's a long time to sustain yourself. So you want to add a lot of food in there that's going to fill your stomach and take a long time to digest. So you're less likely to get hungry through that 7-hour window and make a bad decision. Okay? So vegetables are how you're going to do that. Now, the downside of vegetables, which is this DK, don't keep. Not in the same way that protein will. They do keep for a little while, right? But they don't keep to the same degree as meat. So from my experience and experience with clients over the years, is that vegetables, about 1 to 3 days, they will keep before they get a little wilty, a little soggy. Depending on the vegetable, it might only be 1 to 2 days. Everyone's taste and tolerance is going to vary to some degree on that. So vegetables are probably going to need to be made at least twice a week maybe 3 times a week, right? And that's just unfortunately part of it. Now, this part, right? You do it, someone does it, or you pay someone to do it. So you can buy frozen vegetables in those steamer bags to make that easy for you. So you don't have to worry too much about cooking a lot of it on your own, and you have it handy, and it takes a minute or two in the microwave, right? Microwave is a great tool. Sure, it has its problems, but from this standpoint and just getting in the meat that you want and the food that you want, microwaves are fantastic, okay? So that's one way to make sure you've got access to vegetables that are going to taste fresh and aren't going to be wilted or a little soggy or a little wet when you eat them. The other option is prepping them the night before or the morning of, right? So that's one that really, really works. And in that sense, you're going to use, since I didn't write it up here, I'll write it up here now, the stovetop for your vegetables. And you can just saute. I think it's like that, right? It's not a word I use very often when I write. It might be more like that. I forget. So correct me if I'm wrong or make fun of me, but you know the word I'm talking about, saute. It's going to bug me because I don't think there's another E in it. So, stovetop, right? So you've got your little pan, you saute your veggies, and they'll 100% keep for the whole day for sure. So you can make them in the morning or the night before, put them in the meat that you prepped, that's already sitting in your containers in the fridge, and throw your vegetables in there from that to help keep you full. If you want to have just a big bucket of vegetables that are available for you to pull from, that's also fine. If you work regularly, you might be somewhat limited in what you can store at work, so that might be a little harder. So sometimes it's easier to just take that meal in the day of and put the vegetables in there. We're going to get to this later in the snack aisle, but if you can tolerate raw vegetables, then cool, you don't have to worry about it too much. You can just bring those vegetables with you, have your meat, and then get in your vegetables, completely independently, their own source. Personally, I do not tolerate raw vegetables very well. Now that, if I were to eat them more often, the contents of my stomach might adapt to be able to do that a little bit better, but it's just not something that functions very well for me. The discomfort isn't worth it, but it's totally individual. So if you can tolerate that, awesome. There's plenty of people that can eat carrots, broccoli, cauliflower, and stuff and eat it as a snack, and it does just fine with your body. So if you can do that, that's also another really, really easy way to do this. But having those frozen options for vegetables, great. If you have a freezer at work, awesome, you can leave them there. If you have a freezer at home, which presumably you do, you leave them there. You can buy the individual sizes, you can buy the big sizes, depending on how you want to distribute them in your meals. But your vegetables are your filler, okay? And then for the purposes of most people here, I'm not going to dive into prepping carbohydrates. I'll give you a couple quick notes on that. But protein is your primary source for body composition, improving it. Muscle mass, metabolic function, all that kind of stuff. Protein is like A++, number one, the thing you absolutely have to build and do first. So protein comes first in every meal. Protein comes first in all your meal prep. It is the highest priority thing that you're going to work on. Vegetables are number 2 for micronutrients as well, your vitamins, your minerals, and all that stuff. But for the purposes of this, thought exercise, they're filler. They're things that are going to keep you full, keep you satisfied, and hopefully prevent you from making bad decisions. That's the main objective of it in this scenario. All right, so for carbohydrates, you can use Instant Pot, crock pot, oven, same kind of rules. You can make potatoes, you can make sweet potatoes, you can make rice, you can make quinoa, right? Those things also keep about a week. Thought I had that up here somewhere. Anyway, 6 days, your grains or your carbohydrate sources will keep pretty well. So you don't have to worry like vegetables where they won't keep as long. So if that's a part of it, you can go ahead and make those things. And the good thing is, if you're using an Instant Pot for some pork shoulder and you want sweet potatoes as your carb source for the day, you do them at the same time. Hour's done, you've meal prepped all of that already. It only took you an hour, right? It didn't take that long. The other part is in the snack section, we're going to talk about this, where fruit is going to be a really, really good carb source for you. And I'm not here to debate fructose, good, bad. Otherwise, it is a good carb source, especially if you're trying to lose weight. It'll work just fine to help you lose weight. All right. End of discussion on that topic. There's more nuances to that I can go into in another video if anybody has those questions. But for the purposes of this, fruit's going to be just fine. So carbohydrate wise, we're going to use that as the main thing that we focus on. But all of that is pretty straightforward. I think most people here know how to do that. And just like you can get the frozen vegetables, there are plenty of options, packaged options for grains. You can microwave a potato, takes a long time, so it's not quite as convenient, but you can get rice packs, quinoa packs, different things that are generally 1 serving, maybe 2 servings. Make sure you read the label because a lot of those have 2 servings on them. So you might have 90 grams of carbs in the whole pack. And when you're trying to lose weight, 90 grams of carbs in 1 meal is probably going to be a lot. You know, again, there are individual factors that may determine that, but it's probably going to be a lot. So you're probably not going to need a pack that big. So make sure you get one. You know, they have little cups too that are more like 1 serving, 40 grams of carbs. That would probably be a better option. But there's plenty of prepackaged things that are already available that you can do if you don't want to use one of these tools to make all your carbohydrate sources as well. Now for the final factor is snacking. And in a broad sense, snacking is not optimal. You know, if you could avoid snacking, then I would say to do that. Some of that's habitual, especially in America, right? Most of us are habituated to have snacks, especially in the evening. I don't think it's quite as common around breakfast time, when you're working throughout the day, towards the end of the day, you know, when you're having that energy lull, you're kind of ready to go home, or work's kind of taking your mental energy away and you start to notice your hunger, that kind of thing. That's when you start reaching for stuff. And then sometimes it's you get home, maybe it's 5 or 6 o'clock, but you gotta wait for the kids to get home, you gotta wait for the wife to get home, and then you're gonna have dinner an hour or 2 later, and you had your lunch at noon, and now it's 6:30, and especially if you didn't do what I said earlier, which is fill yourself with those vegetables. But even if you did, your hunger's probably going to be starting to generate, right? So you're going to want to snack a little bit while you're waiting for dinner. And that's fine. We just need to choose things that are more effective for that. So the 4 snack variables that I'll give you are meat. All right, what do I mean by that? Predominantly jerky. That's going to be kind of the most straightforward one. I'm a bit of a weirdo, as most people know me, and I would snack on sardines. I think they're delicious. Most people think they're disgusting, and I'll give you that they don't smell the greatest thing. But if I came home and I was really hungry, but I knew I wasn't going to have dinner for a while, I'm doing all my math. I know how it would fit for me. I would go to sardines, open a can of sardines, eat a couple. I'm going to be pretty satisfied for a while. They got really, really good source of protein. They got a little bit of fat in there. They're tasty. They're a little filling. Perfect snack. But I think for most of you watching this, jerky is probably going to be your best bet. Preferably, like, it doesn't have to be organic, but something that's minimal ingredients. I'll just put a little quick nodule for that. So some of those have sugar added, have a lot of chemicals added to keep their shelf life, which is understandable, right? They want it to live on shelves for a long time. But if you can, when you're purchasing it, get stuff that maybe isn't going to last as long, but is going to be much better for your body. So jerky's a really good one. Another good one are pork rinds. Now we can have a debate on, here's another spelling thing. I wasn't sure of saute. I'm not sure if there's an H here. So here I am not looking super intelligent as I'm doing this, right? But I'm going to assume there's an H there, so pork rinds. But I'm not 100% positive of that, so I'll check myself after this video. Now that I'm seeing it visually, I'm not 100% sure. But pork rinds do come with a little bit of fat, right? So they do have a little fat. So you do have to factor that in if you're eating a lot of fattier stuff the rest of the day. But if you're picking, like I said earlier, the mostly leaner meats, then you're probably going to have some room for fat, so it's not going to affect you too much. So pork rinds, they're really good brands. I know off the top of my head, 405 makes some really good ones that don't have a lot of chemicals in it, and Epic also makes a lot of good ones. And Epic also has jerky, or I think it's called a bison bar. That's like a beef stick or a beef block. I think they have some other meats too. I think they have a venison one. Howie Nui is another brand that I've heard that's also really, really good. So they have these things. So these are going to be better snack options than your typical snack of pretzels or granola or chips and queso and that kind of Cheez-Its, those packaged snacks that are just chock full of calories. They're not really filling. They just make you want more. They're going to add to a lot of consumption of calories. So going back to this is your number one most critical aspect of any diet and of any meal prep. So when you're hungry, you need to focus on things that have protein in them, which is going to be some type of meat product, right? Essentially. So jerky and pork rinds. All right. The other one is fruit. From a dietary standpoint, fruit is going to be your carbohydrate fuel for the most part. Grains for people like me or people that are very active or that are trying to actively build a decent amount of muscle are very valuable. But for people that are trying to lose weight, it's much easier to restrict your total carbohydrate amount with things that are more filling, have more fiber in them, and are quicker on the go. So it's really easy, from my perspective, to eat 2-3 cups of rice, which is going to net you, 400 or 500 calories. The amount of fruit you would need to do that, you need to eat like 5 whole fruits, maybe 6 whole fruits, depending on the fruit. So the likelihood that you're going to sit down and eat 6 oranges back to back to get the same amount of calories you would get if you were to eat, 2 potatoes or 2 or 3 cups of rice or quinoa or whatever is unlikely. So fruit is a much more satisfying food that's going to fill you up, that's going to give you more nutrients, going to give you a little better energy than a lot of other foods. So this can also go in your carb section. So if you wanted to have a little fruit in all your meals, as long as this comes first, that's fine. But I think using fruit as your snack food or your carbohydrate food is going to be a lot better than using any sort of grain food. And again, this is more restrained to the people that are trying to lose weight. Okay, so it's a little different if you have different goals. But for the purposes of this, I think fruit's going to be your best bet. The other great thing about fruit, you don't have to do anything to it. All you got to do is throw it away when you're done if it has rinds or waste on it or a core or anything. So some fruits are better than others. We don't need to get into the nuances of that. But for your main carb sources, berries are number one. I think that's, I don't know why I wrote that diagonally, but I think that's pretty well consensus in the community, in the nutrition community, that berries, top of the food chain, right, for fruit consumption. So 1 cup of blueberries, just for example, I happened to look at this number the other day, is 13 grams of carbs. It's a lot of blueberries. So the amount of calories you're going to get, just like I said earlier, from fruit is going to be much more minimal than any other carbohydrate source that you're probably going to eat. So berries are really, really good, but all of it's good. Bananas, apples, grapefruit, mangoes, oranges, all that stuff, all really, really, really good. Also will satisfy a sweet tooth. And you'll notice, for some of you that have a sweet tooth, if you do this for a couple weeks and you start going just to fruit as a dessert, which is a great way to use it. So if you're just in the habit of having dessert, and when you're done, you go and you grab a cup of berries, and you kind of satisfy that sweet tooth a little bit, your palate will start to shift, where berries taste much, much, much sweeter than they used to. The problem is most people have overconsumed on candy or high sugar foods or cereals or things that really, really provide that, for lack of a better term, shock to your system in their sweetness, that your palate will eventually readjust and kind of ramp down to where all of the fruit is really, really tasteful, really, really sweet. And sometimes you get to a point, especially people that have done a ketogenic diet for a long time, fruit almost becomes too sweet, especially if you're more in like the pineapple range or the mango range, stuff that's a little more higher glycemic. You'll notice that satisfies that sweet tooth just as well as any piece of chocolate or candy would in the past, because your palate is adjusted for that. All right. The other one is nuts. So some nuts are better than others. Some of you may know this. Peanuts are technically a legume because of their structure and how they grow. So they would fall more in the traditional carb category, with beans, rice, potatoes, that kind of thing. So as a snack food, I would not do peanuts. It's going to make it a little harder. You're going to get a lot more calories for less satisfaction out of peanuts as well. So I would just not make that a big one. But all of your pine nuts, hazelnuts, walnuts, Brazil nuts, almonds, all that stuff, really, really solid. Kind of like the vegetables, some people can take raw veggies really, really well. Some people can take raw nuts really, really well. Some people can't. So that's just kind of personal tolerance. You'll have to experiment with that a little bit. There is a caveat to nuts in that they do add up calorically much faster than anything else that we've discussed on here. Fat, hopefully you guys know this by now, but 1 gram of fat equals 9 calories. Right? So fat is the most dense form of energy from your diet that you're going to bring in, which is fine. You need fat in your diet for all kinds of hormonal processes and metabolic processes. So please don't stay away from that. But the math calorically is going to add up faster than anything else you're going to eat. So you have to factor that in a little bit. So if you are going to have nuts as a snack, you do kind of need to measure that. And I think for most people throughout the day, 1 to 2 ounces. You can also look on the back of the bag and it might tell you the amount of nuts. So I know almonds, 1 serving is 22 nuts, right? I don't know why I know that, but that's one that's stored in my memory. So 1 to 2 ounces / servings per day max. I would not exceed that, okay? And ideally, you'll use it in conjunction with some of these other snack options if you're using it as a snack and not as a part of your meal. That way, you're not going to use that as your primary source of getting full because it's not going to be quite as effective as these other sources. But nuts bring a lot of nutritional value to the table, and they're definitely something you want to have as part of a healthy diet. You do need to be a little more cautious on the volume of those that you consume. All right? And then the last one is veggies. And like I said earlier, your ability to snack on raw veggies is going to vary from person to person. It's not something that I can do very comfortably, so this doesn't really factor into how I eat, but many people can do it just fine. And you've got edamame up there too. Not the weird packaged edamame that's been baked and has oil and that kind of stuff on it. But you can find edamame. I think you can even eat it raw. I apologize for not knowing that in advance, but that's a good snack one that you can have. Obviously, all your broccoli, cauliflower, carrots, celery, all that kind of stuff that people can snack on. So absolutely great options for that. And that's just snow peas, right? Snow peas are a big one that people like to snack on. So all of those are awesome. If you can do radishes and onions and that kind of thing, like by all means, great snack food, very, 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 very low calorie. So if you can teach yourself to fill up on that stuff, to satisfy that hunger pang, then you're way out of the game and you're the rest of this stuff is gonna be a piece of cake because you're getting yourself full on stuff that's really, really low calorie. So it's gonna make adhering to these much, much simpler, right? And if you notice, and anybody that knows me, this is what I preach heavily. Real food. Okay? That should be the cornerstone of any good nutrition plan. I don't care what your goals are. Real food that comes from an animal or from the earth should be ideally everything that you eat. We all snack. We all have a couple different things. We all go out to eat occasionally, right? I get that. That's not what I'm trying to say. But if you can do 90 to 95% of meat, fruit, nuts, or veggies, you are kicking butt in the health game and you are doing a great job. And the best part about these things is it's really hard to super overconsume calories when you're eating this way. Right? Is it possible? Of course, you can do too much of anything, but it's much, much, much more difficult. And again, going back to priority 1 is the protein. Eat that first in all of your meals. Because if you eat a pound of protein in a sitting, or 7 to 8 ounces, depending on how you distribute it, or more if you need more, you're not going to be all that hungry after that, right? Because that's going to take up a good amount, and it takes a long time to digest protein. So it's going to keep you full longer. And then if step 2, you're filling up on your vegetables, same thing. Very fibrous, right? Really concentrated structure that your body then has to break down when it's digesting. So that's going to keep you really, really, really full. So protein and vegetables, you do all that, it's probably going to only take a fruit to kind of top that off and make you feel really satisfied through your meals. It's not going to take that much. So hopefully throughout the course of my random doodling here, you understand the idea, and I'll rehash just a couple quick things. So removing friction. I didn't go into recipes. I didn't go into seasoning your meat. I didn't go into that kind of stuff. There's plenty of resources on the internet for that kind of thing. Again, with this in mind of removing friction, I don't concern myself too much with that. I cook things independently and I just eat them independently. I do use Cholula, and I think Worcestershire sauce is a good option. And there's an option that's escaping me at the moment, but Frank's Red Hot, right? That's the other one. They're mostly vinegar based. That's why they keep so long, and they just have a couple ingredients in them that are all natural things. Usually it's pepper, cilantro, a couple basic things to give it a little flavor. And you can use that on all of these items to make them tastier, to add some moisture back in, to give it a little flavor, if you don't want to do a big recipe where all of that's sort of baked into it. So removing the friction, making it as easy as possible, which is why this one specifically, I'm such a big fan of for protein, because it takes the least amount of effort. You put it in overnight, you wake up, boom, your meat's cooked, and you did nothing. You didn't have to put any effort into it. All right, so removing friction, making it as easy as possible. Step one of meal prepping, right? And then protein, protein, protein. Make that first, make that the priority. Make sure you're getting a pound a day of meat and make sure that's cooked, and that will last you 6-7 days. So make that first, distribute that out however you need to. If you're gonna have dinners that are gonna rely on a meat serving, you can base your meal around that. Get all that prepped ahead of time, because the hardest thing to get in the amounts that you need on short notice is protein. It's not impossible, but it's really, really hard. So get protein in first, using these tools to cook all your protein. You can also outsource that and get cooked protein if you want, just like you can all these other things that I talked about. But I think meat is the one that's best done at home and cooked in a large volume. And then vegetables, remember, they don't keep for super long, 2 or 3 days at the max for the most part. So those you're gonna have to make a little more frequently, or you're gonna have to get ones that are frozen or already made for you. That way they're convenient, all right? And that is your filler food. So after you eat your protein, you eat your vegetables, and that's what fills you up. If you have a problem with hunger throughout the day or in a meal, add more, right? Just keep adding these vegetables. You're not gonna be that hungry, I promise. That's gonna fill you up. And then when it comes to snacking or your carbohydrate source for these meals, it's gonna be fruit. But when it comes to snacking, focus on meat first, and that should be your highest priority for a snack. So if you can do that, if you can do jerky or pork rinds as your snack option, that would be like number one to do. And then if that's not quite doing it for you, or you've had enough meat, you just can't quite stomach it, which will change over time. You'll get a little better at that over time. But in the beginning, I understand. That's where you want to go towards fruit, nuts, vegetables, picking one of those, with veggies being the lowest calorie option, obviously, because there's not a whole lot to them. Fruit probably being the next lowest calorie option, and then nuts being the heaviest calorie option. But I think it'd be a good idea to have at least 1 ounce of nuts, or 1 serving of nuts per day, to get some really, really high quality fat in there. All right. Here's a quick still of my messy board, and I'm really enjoying doing this for you guys. I hope you're finding value in this stuff, and I'm happy to dive into any of these topics. And as I go forward more, I'm going to teach you a little bit more about macronutrients and how to utilize this better. But hey, if you really like this, please subscribe, all those YouTube things, right? I'm not out here to do anything special. I just want to try to provide as much value as I can to people that are trying to lose weight and trying to improve their health. So I hope that I can do that for you.